Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the SATO Briefing series. Today, we've got a couple of things to talk about, and one of the big things in front of us here is the P-2 Neptune. Now, if we go way back into the simulated air tanker operations projects, this was one of the first in-house projects we started on, and then we kind of shelved it just because of the time and the effort required that was needed in order to complete the project. And it just kind of sat and kind of languished in digital limbo, if you will. And it wasn't until fairly recently that I was kind of reminded of the fact that we had them and we hadn't really done anything with them. Now, given the time and everything, and the fact that basically the project was basically forgotten about, I went back through to see what all I had, and we we started on this project. We had between me, Jeremy, and the other person that helped start these, we had pretty much all of the Neptunes left, or all of the Neptunes we started on that were actually being operated or had been operated through the years. There was a few I think we hadn't started on, but I think the vast majority of platforms had been covered in the basic model buildup that we had. So in front of me here, this is one of the models that I've taken out of the archive, so to speak, and I've started to work on it to try and update it and kind of bring it up to P3D standards. Because back when we started this was very early FSX times, and for the time, they were pretty basic models. There wasn't a whole lot in them that was functional. But all the stuff that I've learned over the years, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I can try my hand at trying to complete these, which, as I say it now, there's a lot of stuff to do with these still. So these models are completely built from the ground up by us, our group. They are not associated with the Verdavia Neptunes at all. These are strictly air tanker versions. I'm not doing any of the other versions of them. It's just the air tankers, and they're still, even though there's air tankers, there are a lot of variations and small differences between all these P2s that we're hopefully going to be able to represent. This version in front of me here is the P2V5. And really, the difference you can tell right away between it and a P2V7 or P2H, depending on versions of those you're talking about, is the cockpit. The P2V5s have I guess, what they would call a bomber style cockpit, which is completely enclosed in this canopy style here. The P2V7 and P2H, or more common, it's kind of like the bubble canopy, where the canopy's bubble. It has slightly better visibility, and the cockpit layouts are basically different. The P2V7s have controls above the overhead section of the cockpit, while the P2V5s, everything is down on the console, down by the pilot's knees. Um, that's kind of really the only external differences you can tell between the 5 and a 7. But none of the P2s that were around, even the Verdavia ones that came out that were the air tanker versions, um, didn't have a 5 variant. It was just two P2V7 versions that varied very, very little from each other, which I kind of annoyed me. But with the versions that we have not only do we have several versions of the version 5 that are the P2V5s, but we have several versions of the P2V7s. So um, basically enough to cover pretty much all of the operators that flew the P2 Neptunes as tankers. So, and that also includes the dejetted versions that Aero Union flew, that were painted like their iconic P3 Orions. I have that version as well. Now, if you've been following on our Facebook or our Discord, you'll have seen one other paint for the P2V5, which is another Neptune Aviation paint for Tanker 14, and the SP2H flown by Aero Union with the dejetted versions. So those are the two that I've teased publicly. There's a few other versions I've teased that I've been working on the Discord channel for Minden Air. I just finished one late this evening, getting it into P3D for Hawkins and Powers. Um, but I do plan on covering, like I said, all of those P2s. Um, Now, depending on how this goes, I already know that the package is going to be pretty big, so they're going to be split into different versions. So like the P2V5s might be their own package, the P2V7s will be their own, and so on and so forth. Don't know how that's all going to be broken up. I still think there's going to be a long development time for these, just because of how many there are and how many paints I want to do. And the P2s were one of the cooler tankers that they flew the longest, so they had a lot of variations with them associated with it. So like this paint here by Neptune and Black Hills is pretty iconic. So there's going to be a lot of paints to go with them, along with all the model variations, which I'm trying to work through and add little tiny things that these models didn't have, like external details like fill nozzles for the retardant tanks. The retardant tanks on these, I am actually trying to work to animate them so that the doors open on the retardant tanks. This version has a prototype currently um, on it, and so does the Aero Union P2. It also has a version on its tank, as well as some of the other ones have versions of this same tank system on it. Hopefully that will stay true and work with all of them. So that's been a tedious process to try and get that all to work. Along with other minor details for texturing and stuff like that. I won't bore people with because it's a whole development process just to do the texturing for all of these. So, um, but I've been working on these while Microsoft Flight Simulator kind of uh, does its thing in the background. I've been trying to get used to that sim, and I've had it for about a month, and I kind of wanted to touch base on where we are with that sim because it's been slow going. There's been several updates, or I shouldn't say updates, or there's been patches for Microsoft Flight Simulator, but there hasn't been any real noteworthy changes, I feel, for what us in the aerial firefighting department and even other niches are really looking for them to fix. They haven't really addressed them. It's more small bugs and other things. Maybe eventually they'll get to these niches, but there are some huge bugs that I've discovered myself, especially in career mode. In career mode, I went to do helicopters. Is pretty much where I've been focused on. And the missions, I've come to realize there is no physical person I feel that is behind creating these missions for the career mode. It is all completely AI generated because there are so many bugs involved with mission objects being placed in completely ridiculous places in groves of trees and inside of areas where you can't get a helicopter and starting missions where helicopters are completely crushed by autogen scenery. It's kind of ridiculous. So like I would say 70% of missions you can kind of work around the bugs and still complete the missions, and the other 30% you can't complete the mission at all because it's that bugged. It'll either You'll either crash your helicopter or crash your aircraft. The game itself will crash. Um, but yeah, that's just some of the stuff that I've seen with it as I've gotten to this game a little bit further. Um, I've addressed all this stuff in their Microsoft forums to talk about and logging bugs and things like that. Like I said, I've been primarily focused on helicopter stuff for right now, but I've also made note of all the shortcomings in the firefighting stuff for the fixed wing aircraft. In particular, the CL415. The CL415 is atrocious. So, I mean, the aircraft looks good and everything like that, but I tell you what, based on all the stuff, all the videos that I've watched on it about how bad it is, like trying to complete missions, I haven't flown it yet to see that, but I've done some flights in it to where I can understand where these people are coming from. And based on all the stuff that people have said, the CL-415, as an example, is completely underperforming compared to the real airplane. So the CL-415 can fly at 180 knots when it's full of water, which is about 1,600 gallons of water. And it can achieve a climb rate of 1,200 feet per minute, roughly. It depends on the data where you're reading this from, but I basically you can get to about 1,200 feet per minute. Now in Flight Simulator, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, you can't approach any of those numbers whatsoever. So it's kind of ridiculous in that sense. You struggle to climb out of scoop locations even with partial loads of water on board. I don't know why this is or why they've so sucked back the performance of this airplane. I have no idea. But this kind of just goes to show you how buggy a lot of this stuff still is with this game. So it's annoying, but I've also made points to report these bugs, like the underperformance of the airplane, because not only does it not cruise at 180 knots, it can barely get to 100 knots, I think. And like I said, the the climb performance is absolutely terrible. You can't scoop a full load of water, which they do routinely. So I don't know why this is such a huge problem for this. That's I mean I shouldn't say I know why it's a huge problem. It's because they didn't accurately gauge the performance of the airplane at all. The other thing is that there's been a thing that they addressed in people have addressed in career mode, where you are trying to scoop water at 60 knots, which is totally inaccurate. Scooping, for anybody who doesn't know, for most of these airplanes that scoop, like the Martin Mars, the CL-415s, scooping is done at reasonably uh, a reasonable maneuvering speed for the airplane, which means if something were to happen on the water, the airplane can immediately take off from the water or maneuver to get out of the way of an obstacle, a boat, for example, or things that could possibly cause the airplane to crash. So that means on the CL-415, they're scooping between 80 and 100 knots. So the fact that the game requires you to be at 60 knots to scoop is absolutely inaccurate and is basically unsafe. The CL-415 stalls at 68 knots. So in the game, you're flying. I shouldn't even say you're flying. You're scooping 8 knots below its flying speed, its very lowest flying speed, which is again inaccurate. So I've made bug reports for them to fix that, so that you're at least scooping at 80 knots, not 60. Um, it's just like stuff like that is just like they took these airplanes, made them, and then I feel like nobody did any sort of research or testing in any type of real world scenarios in the sim, or any type of real world data to support where these missions are created and how they operate. It's just kind of there's so much potential here in this sim, and it's frustrating to me. And maybe you can hear it in my and how I'm describing this. There's so much potential for this sim, and they're floundering because they're using this. I'm assuming it's AI because that's the only thing that would make sense to me, and how asinine some of this stuff is just put together. It's like, yes, there's all these missions that are created, and they use some sort of parameters for for AI to generate these missions. But I tell you what, for certain niches like search and rescue, and firefighting, and any of these other, like even the ag missions that I've been able to fly in helicopters, it's just they spawn things that don't make sense, and then it's obvious that nobody tested them. It's frustrating. So, um, I mean, that's basically how I can say how my 1 month review of Flight Simulator is right now, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. It's frustrating because, like I said, there's so much potential there, and it's just kind of letting everybody down. That's like a hardcore simmer. Now, granted, if sim is still fun, you can still do a lot of the missions in free fly or in career mode. Like I said, about 70% of them in Rotary Wing you can probably complete. So it's not like it's completely unplayable. You still can. It's just there are so many bugs that they need to fix, and the niches like search and rescue. And again, this is just Rotary Wing. These problems exist all the way over into fixed wing too. So like these things need to be fixed in order to help this sim not completely bomb. Because even if you go and you look on YouTube, there are so many reviews from these bigger YouTube channels that are just completely bombing on it because of how bad and buggy it is. It feels like DCS. If anybody's familiar with DCS, DCS is so small that they use an open beta, or they used to use the structuring is still the same. They basically use the player base to test the game, and that's how Asobo is basically using the player base. But the problem is like the difference between DCS and say Microsoft Flight Simulator is DCS, the base game is free. You can buy modules for it for, between around between 60 and $80, right? For your aircraft. Microsoft Flight Simulator, the you start at $60. So what it would cost for one of these modules for DCS, right? For the very basic version, I think it is. Now, if you go and buy the Aviator edition, which is the top tier edition of Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's $200. $200. And for people like me who paid that much money, I wasn't provided it for free or anything. I bought it with my own money. That this sim is so buggy that you're paying $200 to play this bug-ridden sim where, like I said, a, a good portion of missions, in some of these areas that you fly in career mode, almost all the missions are bugged. So you can't even fly there at all. And it's kind of ridiculous that you pay this much money, and not only that, but you don't have access to all these extra aircraft that you pay for in the Aviator Edition. You think you would get those, right, in career mode? Well, you don't. Apparently, none of those extra aircraft that you pay money for can you use in career mode. So, for example, where I'm at in career mode in Flight Sim is um, you have basically one turbine helicopter that you can afford fairly easily, which is the R66 turbine. And the next step up from that is the H125 from Airbus, the A Star. That one, if you buy it brand new in the sim, is almost $2 million. Now, I appreciate the economic setup in the career mode. However, there is like nothing in between the $300,000 R66 turbine and the 1.9, almost $2 million H125. So that's kind of ridiculous in my opinion, because there's other helicopters that this game comes with that you could feasibly fly in career mode and use as a step up before you get to these other aircraft, and it's just not there. The options are just not there. Um, so that's a big headache, and I see that a lot of people talking about in firefighting missions that for if you go to career mode, there's no medium-sized aircraft to really jump up before you can go to something like the VLAT, which is like I think I read online it's like 67 or 66 million dollars to buy to use in career mode. It's freaking ridiculous. So me in my original postings in there, I said they needed other interim or medium-sized aircraft to augment the aircraft that they have in there already, because flying these smaller airplanes like the air tractor, the AT-802, you have to fly a bunch of these firefighting missions in order to get the 415, and then once you get the 415, you basically have those two options to fly, and that's it until you hope that you build up enough money to get a DC-10, or I mean a 747, which realistically you can only fly the 747 on so many fires because it's so huge. So that's what I mean by there's so much potential there, and there's just nothing in these gaps to help with the simulation. So that's kind of my 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 rant, if you will, about where we are with Microsoft Flight Simulator in terms of gameplay. In terms of development, that's even another bigger headache right now because we're still not any different off or any better off than we were in January or December or November even. So in terms of development, there's like nothing anybody can do because they're still trying to fix the SDK. And like I said, we still don't have access to any of the base aircraft for the sim to know how any of it's put together, how it works. You can't even add, uh, but maybe a limited number of liveries to the sim. So you can't even make your own. It's frustrating there for the development side too. So, and that kind of goes like I said with the S2 that Jeremy's trying to work on. He can't really work on it for this sim because the SDK isn't even complete, and we don't know how any of the file structures are set up either. I mean, it's just like a huge shot in the dark for anybody who's trying to get into this sim, out the gate. Even you can try and build it for 2020, and Jeremy's tried to do that. That's how he's been building his S2 for the longest time. And when he tried to put it into the new sim, it doesn't work, and we don't know how to fix it because, like I said, we don't have any of the access to know where to go. So it's kind of, like I said, ridiculous in a lot of that sense. But hopefully, like I said, it's still a new sim. I keep trying to tell myself that it's still a new sim. They're still trying to work on it. Um, Sim Update 1, uh, it started testing, I want to say, at the end of January or the beginning of February. And I think, as I read today on the forums, they just now, or I shouldn't say just now, they've come out with, I think, the third or fourth iteration of Sim Update 1. So apparently there's enough issues that they have to keep updating Sim Update 1 to have it tested before they try and release it. So I don't know when they're going to come out with Sim Update 1. But from what it sounds like, Sim Update 1 is just like a bunch of basic fixes. I don't know what it's going to do for fixing all this stuff in career mode or any of this other stuff. And a lot of this stuff, they said, oh, you're going to have to wait for Sim Update 2, which is like they're planning another 4 or 5 months later. Which, I mean, that's a long time to be dealing with a lot of these bugs. And granted, they're doing some of these interim patches in between all this, but still, there's a lot of stuff to deal with. So, um, that's kind of where we stand currently. Um, I know it seemed like a huge rant there at the end for Microsoft Flight Simulator, but I hope, I hope that they get on the bandwagon here and like start doing some stuff because I really, really see the potential for this sim, but they just need to do some stuff to get it moving in the right direction because right now it just seems like a huge stalemate. So, uh, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and tune into the next one.